Mackenzie Johnston with Tri-State Livestock News, bringing you discussions concerning fair cattle markets. Today we have the opportunity to chat with South Dakota's Lieutenant Governor, Larry Rhoden. He is also serving as Interim Secretary of Ag in South Dakota. So to start off with, can you just tell me a little bit about your background, your involvement within the cattle industry, and also tell me a little bit about your roles as Lieutenant Governor and Interim Ag Secretary there in South Dakota?
I was born and raised right here on this ranch that Dad put together when he came back from World War II. My brother's on the original homestead about 2 miles from here. Got involved in politics in 2000. I was elected to the state legislature, served 16 years total in the state legislature. During that time, I became involved in state ag and rural leaders, served as president of that national organization at one point. 2 years ago, elected Governor Noem and I were elected. I became lieutenant governor. So I've always been very involved in ag, and the governor as well. She felt that I was the right guy for the job when Kim Vanneman resigned. And so about a month, 5 weeks ago, Governor Noem named me as interim secretary of ag. And so it has been busy.
Yeah, I'm sure so. So what do you feel are the major issues standing in the way of fair cattle markets today?
You know, there are a lot of things at play, but I really think the biggest issue is competition. In rural America, you know, we love the free market. Unfortunately, the free market has been short-circuited in the cattle industry, and the bottleneck is always processing. You know, on one end of the equation, we have a concentration of packers that control 85% of the market. And so anytime there's something that happens, like the fire a year ago in a processing facility, now it's coronavirus, it creates a bottleneck where the retail prices go through the roof. On the other end of the equation, the producers that are taking it on the chin because the prices have dropped to nothing. So the bottleneck is always the processing. And whether it's the concentration issue, we just need more competition in the marketplace.
So how do you think we achieve that competition?
You know, I've listened to some of your interviews. There's been a lot of talk about some of the federal legislation and the Grassley legislation. Senator Rounds has a bill for sales across state lines. I think that would be a huge step in the right direction. We've been working on that either through a presidential executive order or through legislation. Legislation would be a long-term fix. If we could sell our state-inspected beef across state lines. But for me, I've tried to keep a perspective. You know, I've been working on the issue of the concentration in the processing since before I was in the legislature in the 90s. My first trip to Washington, D.C. was to lobby to urge enforcement of the Stalkers and Packers Act. And we've seen the result of that over the last 30 years. And so I've become a little jaded as far as whether we accomplish anything at the federal level. So I'm focused on what we can do at the state level. You know, it would help us tremendously if we could sell beef across state lines, but it would, you know, we have tools available in South Dakota that I think have a lot of potential for South Dakota producers. A number of years ago, Senator Mike Rounds was governor then. We introduced and passed a trademark for Dakota certified beef. I think that legislation was a little ahead of its time then, but we've seen firsthand for 30 years now how nothing has changed. And I think if we could encourage more processing and find a marketplace for our beef outside of South Dakota, whether it's through state inspected plants or we already have federally inspected plants, that we could market our beef out of state and deal with the packer issue and Senator Grassley's legislation. You know, I wish him well, and we'll do everything we can to support him. But I'm focused on what's in front of me and what we can do in South Dakota and are moving forward with.
You just made the comment that our industry has been dealing with essentially a tough marketplace for 30 years, or this market concentration at the processing sector for 30 years. Why do you think we've let that problem go so long? Why have we waited this long to address it?
I think some of the areas have been identified. We're all independent producers, and we're all proud of that. But it makes it harder for us to speak with one voice and have the kind of voice that the corporate America has in the packing industry. And I've seen it even in some of the conversations I've had with FSIS. I was on a Zoom call with them, and they were asked point blank why we couldn't sell state inspected beef across state lines. Because the fact of the matter is, and the feds know it, and they admit it freely, that our inspection is equal to or better than the federal inspection, but it's not identical to. It's pretty obvious that I think the packing industry has a much, much stronger lobby than we do.
What is your thoughts on the DOJ investigation into meat packer pricing?
Well, again, I'm all for it. I wish them well.
Right.
And I'm not being cynical because, with the COVID crisis, that's brought to the surface a lot of issues. And I think as hard as it is to say, I think it's provided some opportunities. Even the Smithfield closure, I was pretty impressed with how we stepped up to the plate in South Dakota. The difference being our producers in South Dakota, about 80% of our hogs are independently owned. They're not tied to a vertical integrated company. And so the decision, when we had this huge backlog in overweight hogs, the decision on what to do with them was in the hands of independent producers, not being decided in a corporate boardroom. And what they did was found alternative markets, and we've got all the packing houses in the state. I challenge you to find one of the roughly 100 packing houses in the state that could butcher a beef for you in the next 6 months.
Right.
And so that's brought to light that there's opportunity there. And you tie that with the program I mentioned before, Dakota Certified. I think the time has come for us at the state level, to take some steps to help add value for our South Dakota producers.
About a month ago, President Trump made the statement that he wanted to eliminate trade deals where we import cattle into America. What is your thoughts on that statement? And also, what are your thoughts on imports of cattle and beef into America?
Well, obviously, as a producer and having lived through these markets, it's tough for me to not say that I don't oppose foreign imports of beef, especially when we're bringing beef into the United States, and they have a lower bar to cross to sell their product on the open market nationwide than we do at the state level.
Mm-hmm.
That just doesn't make sense. So I hope he's sincere, and I hope that he can get it done. I think we deserve a better market for our own producers.
If we are able to implement substantial change within our cattle markets here in the near future, and this tough economic environment continues on for cattle producers, what do you see happening to the American cattle producer?
It's hard to keep a very bright picture because you and I have both seen firsthand the impact. And in South Dakota, something like I think 30% of our producers, farmers and ranchers, are over 65 years of age. And I know how tough it was for me, and I'm 61, when I took over the place from my father. And nothing's gotten easier since then. So, it's not a bright future the way it stands right now, but that's the way it stands right now. And so we should be more than motivated to make change and to add ability for our producers to survive and thrive in South Dakota.
To add on to the question I just asked, do you think our industry is in danger of becoming vertically integrated like we've seen in the other protein industries?
I don't think it's as big a problem as it is, say, in the pork industry, because of the way the hogs are raised and how short the growth cycle is. And so if you're looking at it from that perspective, even in our pork industry, the strong majority of our hogs are still independently owned in South Dakota. I have a hard time envisioning how it would work from a corporate level. I don't think, I don't think you're going to get producers to go through what we go through and dealing with the droughts and the floods and dragging calves through snowbanks to keep them alive. I can't envision how you do that under a corporate structure.
If you could sum everything up into one sentence, what does the cattle industry need most today?
The cattle industry needs competition in the slaughter industry because that is always the bottleneck.
So in your government position that you hold, I'm guessing you talk to quite a few producers, hear from quite a few people. What are you hearing from cattle producers across the state of South Dakota?
No, just what I just said. We need a fair market. In a capitalistic society where supply and demand, we live through the tough times, but when the demand's up, we want to enjoy the profits like everybody else. Unfortunately, that's not the way it's been for the last 30 years.
Cattle producers have been dealing with tough prices for years now. How have you seen these tough economic times affect your rural area?
The rural area, it's pretty resilient, and we went through all these cycles so many times, even in my lifetime. And we've had years where the markets were good, not very many, but they upgraded their machinery and they spent the money, but their lifestyle pretty much stays the same because they're very, very resilient people and they're used to getting by and tightening their belt and moving on. So even through this COVID crisis, I've been amazed to have a foot in both worlds, in Pier and at home. And I come home and everything seems normal. Everybody's doing just what they normally would have done. So you get to Pier, everything's turned on its head.